The transport ship's engines hummed their final notes before cutting to silence. Through the small porthole, Tom Bradley watched the red dust swirl across endless dunes under twin suns that blazed like angry eyes in the orange sky. Ashara Prime looked exactly like the briefing videos had shown, but somehow more brutal in person. The heat shimmer made the horizon dance like water, though Tom knew there wouldn't be any water for hundreds of miles. "All contestants prepare for deployment," announced the mechanical voice over the ship's speakers. Tom checked his gear one last time. A basic survival kit, water for 3 days, some dried food, and a small tool set. The same equipment every participant received, regardless of species. The Galactic Council wanted this challenge to be fair, they said. Tom almost laughed at that. Fair meant different things when you came from different worlds. Around him, 11 other beings made their final preparations. The Helix representatives looked like living crystals, their bodies catching and reflecting light in beautiful patterns. They whispered to each other in musical tones that sounded like wind chimes. Tom had read about them during the journey. They came from frozen worlds where ice never melted and temperatures never rose above what humans would call freezing. Near the back of the transport, 3 Nautari checked their moisture packs. Their skin had a wet, glossy look, and they moved with the fluid grace of creatures born in water. Every few minutes, one would spray themselves with a fine mist from their equipment. Their home planets were ocean worlds, with humidity so thick, you could almost drink the air. The Corvin team wore sleek environmental suits that hummed with cooling systems. Tom could see the small displays on their arms showing temperature readings, humidity levels, and other data. They came from space stations and artificial worlds where climate control was as simple as adjusting a dial. Their technology was impressive, but Tom wondered how well it would hold up under the desert's punishment. Other species filled the transport. Some Tom recognized from the briefings. Others were completely alien to him. All of them had one thing in common, though. They looked at Tom and the few other humans with barely hidden amusement. The word had spread quickly through the galactic community after Earth joined the Council. Humans were the new species, the primitive ones who still lived on their birth world and hadn't mastered climate control or environmental adaptation. Water. World species, he had heard one of the Drex warriors mutter earlier. Soft and dependent on their wet little planet. Tom didn't bother to correct them. Let them think what they wanted. He had grown up in the Australian outback, where his grandfather taught him to find water in places that looked bone dry. His father had been a well driller, and Tom followed in his footsteps until wandering stars called him away from Earth. The desert wasn't his enemy. It was just another puzzle to solve. The transport ship touched down with a soft thud, and the cargo bay doors hissed open. Heat slammed into the cabin like a physical blow. Tom felt it hit his face and arms, but his body began adjusting immediately. Sweat started forming on his forehead, his body's ancient cooling system kicking into action. The Helix stumbled as the heat wave hit them. Their crystalline bodies began to dim, the light patterns flickering as they tried to process this new environment. One of the Nautari made a sound like a dying fish and immediately began spraying herself with water from her pack. "Contestants have 30 standard days to survive," announced the Council observer, a tall figure in a climate suit so advanced it looked like liquid metal. "Rescue ships will return at the end of the trial period. Any contestant who activates their emergency beacon will be immediately removed but disqualified. The challenge begins now." Tom stepped off the transport and felt his boots sink slightly into the red sand. The ground radiated heat like a giant oven, and the air tasted dry and metallic. Around him, the other contestants were already splitting up, each group heading in different directions across the wasteland. The Corvin team moved with military precision, their leader checking a handheld device that probably contained detailed maps and environmental readings. They headed toward what looked like a rocky outcrop in the distance, seeking shelter and a place to set up their base. The Nautari stayed close to the landing site, unwilling to venture far from the transport's shadow. Tom could see them rationing, their water sprays already worried about their limited supply. The Helix had formed a circle and were having an urgent discussion in their chiming language. Every few seconds, one of them would look up at the twin suns with what Tom guessed was fear. Their bodies were built for cold, not heat, and those suns would be their worst enemy for the next 30 days. Tom shouldered his pack and started walking. Not toward the rocks where everyone else was heading, but parallel to the transport's landing path. During the descent, he had noticed something the others probably missed, the way the sand changed color in certain areas, the slight depressions that might indicate old watercourses, the types of rocks that often sat above underground streams. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Water always leaves signs, Tommy. You just have to know how to read them." The sand crunched under his feet as he walked. Behind him, he could hear the other contestants setting up camps or arguing about strategies. None of them were thinking long-term yet. They were focused on immediate shelter, on hiding from the heat and the suns. Tom kept walking. The heat was strong, but not unbearable. His body was already adapting, his sweat evaporating efficiently to keep him cool. He had all day to explore, and tonight, when the temperature dropped, he would begin the real work. Finding water in the desert wasn't about luck or advanced technology. It was about patience, observation, and understanding how water moved through rock and sand over thousands of years. Tom had learned those lessons in some of the driest places on Earth. Now he would teach them to the galaxy. The third day brought no mercy. Twin suns climbed toward their peak, turning the sky into a furnace that seemed to press down on everything below. Tom wiped sweat from his forehead and checked the crude sundial he had scratched in the sand. Almost noon, when the temperature would reach its daily maximum. Time to find shade and wait for evening. From his position on a small rise, he could see most of the other contestants scattered across the desert. It wasn't a pretty sight. The Helix team had made it less than 2 miles from the landing site, before the heat started cracking their crystalline bodies. They huddled now under a makeshift shelter, but even in shade, the ambient temperature was destroying them slowly. Their once bright forms had turned dull and gray, with dark fracture lines spreading through their crystal flesh. The Nautari had fared even worse. They had burned through half their water supply in the first day, spraying themselves constantly to keep their skin from drying out. Now they lay in whatever shade they could find, panting like dying fish. One of them had already activated his emergency beacon yesterday. The rescue ship had taken him away, but not before Tom saw the fear in the eyes of the other 2 Nautari. The Corvin team's advanced suits were failing. Tom could see them clustered around their equipment, working frantically to repair cooling systems that couldn't handle the desert's punishment. Their technology was impressive, but it was designed for controlled environments, not the raw brutality of a world that didn't care about specifications or limits. Other species struggled with their own problems. The Veilani, graceful beings from garden worlds, had quickly learned that their flowing robes offered no protection against heat stroke. The Drex warriors, used to conquering through strength and aggression, found that the desert couldn't be intimidated or defeated in battle. Tom climbed down from the rise and made his way to a shallow cave he had found the day before. The rock formation wasn't much, just a slight overhang that created a pocket of cooler air, but it was enough. He settled in for the midday wait, sipping carefully from his water bottle. He had already stretched his 3-day supply into 5 days by being careful, but that wasn't the real plan. While the others fought against the heat or hid from it, Tom spent his time reading the desert. His grandfather had taught him to see water signs that most people missed, the way certain plants grew, how rocks were worn by ancient streams, the color changes in sand that showed where moisture might collect underground. Yesterday, during his exploration, he had found what he was looking for. A depression between two rocky outcrops where the sand was slightly darker, where tiny hardy plants struggled to survive, where the rock formation suggested water might collect far below the surface. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the best chance he would find. The heat reached its peak around midday, and Tom could hear the sounds of distress echoing across the desert. Someone was calling for help in a language he didn't recognize. Another emergency beacon activated, its high-pitched whine cutting through the air before a rescue ship descended to collect another failed contestant. Tom waited. Patience was the first rule of desert survival. Fight the desert, and it would kill you. Work with it, understand its rhythms, and you might live long enough to find what you needed. As the suns began their slow descent, the temperature started to drop. Not by much, but enough that Tom could leave his shelter and continue his work. He made his way back to the depression he had marked, carrying his small tool set and a plan that would have seemed insane to most of the galaxy. He was going to dig a well, by hand, in the middle of a desert, without any advanced equipment or geological scanners or environmental suits. The first shovel full of sand was the hardest, not because of the physical work, but because of what it represented. Tom was betting his life on knowledge passed down from his grandfather, on instincts developed over years of finding water in the Australian outback, on the hope that what worked on Earth would work here. The sand was soft at first, easier to move than he had expected, but as he dug deeper, it began to change. The red color gave way to darker earth. The texture became more packed, more promising. Small stones appeared, then larger rocks that he had to pry out by hand. Night fell while he worked, and the desert temperature dropped dramatically. Tom could see lights in the distance where other contestants huddled around whatever heat sources they could manage. The Corvin team had managed to get one of their suits working again, and its glow showed where they had set up camp. Tom kept digging. His hands were raw, his back ached, and sweat soaked his clothes despite the cooler air. But the hole was getting deeper, and the soil at the bottom was getting darker, damper, more promising. By dawn, he had dug down almost 8 feet. His arms could barely lift the improvised shovel anymore, but he could smell something that made his heart race. The earth at the bottom of his hole smelled different, richer, like it had known water recently. The 4th day brought new disasters for the other contestants. 2 more helix had given up, their crystalline forms too damaged to continue. The Nautari were down to emergency water rations. Even the proud Drex warriors were looking desperate, as their strength meant nothing against an enemy they couldn't fight. Tom spent the day resting and planning. His hole was deep, but not deep enough yet. He needed to go further down, to where the real water waited, if it was there at all. That evening, as the temperature dropped again, he resumed digging. 12 feet down, 15 feet, 20. The work was becoming harder as the hole got deeper, but the soil was definitely changing. It was darker now, and when he pressed it in his fist, it held together. Moisture was down there somewhere. On the 5th morning, as Tom cleared sand from the bottom of his hole, his improvised shovel hit something different. Not rock or hard clay, but something soft and wet. He knelt down in the narrow space and dug with his hands, pulling away sand and clay until water began to seep into the bottom of the hole. It wasn't much at first, just a slow trickle that turned the dirt to mud, but as he cleared more space, the flow increased. Clear, cool water began to pool at the bottom of his well. Tom cupped some in his hands and tasted it carefully. Clean, no salt, no bitter chemicals. Pure groundwater that had been waiting underground for who knew how long. Around him, the desert stretched empty and brutal under the twin suns. But here, in this impossible place, he had found life. Water changed everything. Tom stared down at the small pool forming at the bottom of his well and felt something between relief and triumph. The trickle was slow but steady, enough to keep him alive and maybe even comfortable for the remaining weeks of the challenge. But as he climbed out of the hole and looked across the desert, he realized his discovery would mean much more than personal survival. The other contestants were dying, not quickly, but inevitably. The heat was breaking them down day by day, and their water supplies were nearly gone. From his elevated position, Tom could see the Corvin team's camp where they had managed to rig a solar still, but it only produced a few drops each day. The remaining helix had stopped moving entirely, their crystalline forms now dull and cracked beyond repair. Tom spent the morning improving his well. He used flat stones to line the bottom, creating a small reservoir where water could collect. He built a simple pulley system with rope from his pack and a piece of metal from some debris he had found. Most importantly, he created a cover to keep sand from blowing into his water source. The work was careful and methodical. His grandfather had always said that finding water was only half the job. Keeping it clean and accessible was what separated the living from the dead in the desert. By afternoon, word of his success had somehow spread. Tom wasn't sure how. Maybe one of the orbital observers had mentioned it, or perhaps the other contestants had noticed his improved condition. Whatever the reason, he had visitors. The first to approach was Dr. Wren, one of the Velani scientists. The elegant being moved slowly across the sand, clearly suffering from heat exhaustion. Her usually perfect robes were stained with sweat and dust, and her normally graceful movements had become stumbling steps. "Human Tom?" she called out when she was still 50 feet away. "We have heard rumors. Is it true you have found water?" Tom wiped his hands on his shirt and walked over to meet her. Up close, he could see how badly the heat was affecting her. The Velani came from worlds with carefully controlled climates, where temperature and humidity were managed to perfect levels. This brutal desert was as alien to her as an ice world would be to Tom. "I dug a well," he said simply. "There's groundwater here if you know where to look." Dr. Wren's eyes went wide. In her culture, water was something that flowed from systems and machines, not something you found by digging holes in the ground. The concept of a hand-dug well was as foreign to her as space travel had once been to early humans. "You dug through solid ground? With hand tools? How deep?" "About 25 feet, Tom replied. "Hit the water table this morning." The Velani scientist stared at the modest pile of excavated sand and rock beside Tom's camp. To her eyes, it probably looked impossible. Her people used massive machines and careful calculations to access underground resources. The idea that a single being could dig that deep with primitive tools was beyond her understanding. "Would you?" She hesitated, then started again. "Would you share this water? I have things to trade. Information, technology, cultural artifacts from my home world." Tom nodded toward his well. "Water's free. Help yourself." Dr. Wren looked confused. "Free? But surely you want payment, compensation. This water is incredibly valuable." "Water's not something you charge desperate people for," Tom said. "But if you want to trade for other things, we can talk about that later." The Velani scientist lowered a container into the well with shaking hands. When she brought up the clear, cool water and took her first drink, tears actually formed in her eyes. Tom had seen that reaction before, in drought-stricken areas of Earth where his family's wells had saved communities. Word spread quickly after that. By evening, Tom had a steady stream of visitors. The remaining Corvin soldiers arrived just before sunset, their leader carrying a damaged cooling unit that clearly wasn't working anymore. "Human," the Corvin commander said formally. "I am Captain Rex. We have observed your success with great interest. Our equipment has failed, and our water supplies are nearly exhausted. We request permission to access your well," Tom gestured toward the water. Help yourselves. Just try not to muddy it up too much. The Corvan captain looked puzzled by Tom's casual attitude. In their military culture, resources were always controlled, rationed, and traded according to strict protocols. The idea of simply sharing life-saving water with potential competitors went against everything they understood about survival situations. As the Corvan soldiers filled their containers, their captain pulled out a small device that had been damaged by the heat. This is a geological scanner, he explained. It can analyze soil composition and locate underground resources. The heat fried its circuits, but if you can repair it, you would know exactly where to dig for more water. Tom examined the device, politely, though he doubted he could fix the advanced technology. Thanks, but I think I can find water without it. The desert tells you where to look if you know how to listen. The captain's expression showed he didn't understand what Tom meant, but he nodded respectfully anyway. As night fell, Tom found himself at the center of a small community. The survivors had set up camps around his well, drawn by the promise of water and the hope of lasting through the remaining weeks of the challenge. They came from different worlds, spoke different languages, and had different customs, but they all understood one thing. The human had found life in a place where death was supposed to rule. Dr. Wren approached him as he sat by his small fire, cooking a simple meal from his remaining supplies. "Human Tom," she said quietly, "how did you know where to dig? What signs did you read that our instruments could not detect?" Tom looked out across the desert, where the twin moons were rising over the dunes. "My grandfather taught me that water leaves traces everywhere it goes. The color of sand, the way rocks are worn, which plants manage to grow where. It's not about technology, it's about understanding how water moves through the world." The Veilani scientist nodded slowly, though Tom could tell she was still trying to process the concept. In her world, knowledge came from databases and sensors. The idea that useful information could be passed down through generations by word of mouth was as primitive to her as her advanced instruments were complex to him. "Your people," she said finally. "They must be very wise about survival." Tom smiled. "We're just used to living on a world that doesn't make things easy for us. Earth throws everything at you. Deserts, ice storms, floods, droughts, hurricanes. You learn to adapt, or you don't last long." Around the well, the other survivors were settling in for the night. For the first time since the challenge began, none of them looked like they were about to die. The water had bought them time, hope, and a chance to see the end of the 30-day trial. Tom banked his fire and prepared for sleep, but he couldn't help wondering what his grandfather would think about this whole situation. The old man had spent his life finding water in the Australian outback, never imagining that his grandson would use those same skills on an alien world, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy. The desert had tested them all, and most had failed. But the human had not just survived, he had found abundance where others saw only death. By the second week, Tom's well had become the center of a small desert town. What had started as a desperate gathering of survivors had evolved into something more organized, more permanent. The aliens had set up their camps in a rough circle, around the water source, each species claiming their own space, but all dependent on the humans' discovery. Tom had never intended to become a leader, but circumstances pushed him into the role. The other contestants looked to him for guidance, not just about water, but about desert survival in general. He found himself teaching lessons his grandfather had passed down decades ago, translated now for beings who had never seen a natural desert before. The Corvan soldiers had been the first to approach him with a formal trade proposal. Captain Rex arrived at Tom's shelter one morning, carrying a collection of military equipment that had survived the heat better than their environmental suits. "Human Tom," the captain said, standing at attention. "We propose an exchange. Our knowledge of tactical planning and equipment maintenance in return for water rights and survival instruction. Tom looked over the offered items. Combat knives with molecular edges that could cut through almost anything. Emergency shelter materials that could provide better shade than his current setup. A water purification tablet dispenser that could make any liquid safe to drink. Fair enough, Tom agreed. But I don't need the weapons. Keep those. The shelter materials and purification tablets, though, those could help everyone. Captain Rex looked surprised. In Corvan culture, weapons were the most valuable trade goods, symbols of power and status. The fact that Tom dismissed them so casually didn't make sense to the military mindset. Over the following days, Tom learned about military organization and efficiency from the Corvan team. They showed him how to set up a proper camp perimeter, how to organize supplies for maximum efficiency, and how to maintain equipment in harsh conditions. In return, Tom taught them how to read weather patterns in the desert, how to conserve body water, and how to identify the signs that indicated underground water sources. Dr. Wren brought him a different kind of wealth. The Velani scientist had spent years studying geology and planetary formation. She offered detailed star charts, scientific knowledge about desert ecosystems, and most valuably, a working translator unit that let Tom communicate clearly with all the different species. Your method of finding water, she explained through the translator, it is based on empirical observation over generations, yes? This is actually more reliable than our technological approach in unknown environments. Our instruments are programmed for specific conditions. Your knowledge adapts to any situation. The trade with Dr. Wren opened up communication with the other survivors in ways Tom hadn't expected. Suddenly, he could understand the musical language of the few remaining Helix, who offered him crystalline formations that could store and purify water naturally. The Notari, desperate to survive, shared their knowledge of water conservation and the biological processes that allowed them to extract moisture from almost any source. Even the proud Drex warriors eventually came to trade. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Commander Tor, approached Tom's well with obvious reluctance. The Drex were conquerors by nature, used to taking what they needed rather than asking for it. "Human," Commander Tor growled through the translator. "We do not beg, but we will trade honor for water." Tom wasn't sure what that meant until the Drex commander began demonstrating combat techniques and survival skills developed over centuries of warfare on hostile worlds. They showed Tom how to move efficiently across difficult terrain, how to conserve energy during physical labor, and how to maintain equipment with minimal resources. The Drex knowledge proved immediately useful. Tom redesigned his well system using their engineering insights, creating a more efficient pulley system and better water storage. The improvements meant he could draw more water with less effort and store larger quantities for the growing community. As a word of the desert settlement spread, even the orbital observers began to take notice. Ships would occasionally pass overhead, their sensors no doubt recording the impossible sight of a thriving community in the middle of one of the galaxy's most hostile environments. The other contestants began to understand that Tom wasn't just sharing water out of kindness. He was building something larger than individual survival. Each trade brought new knowledge, new capabilities, and new ways to thrive in the desert rather than simply endure it. The Trillian musicians, who had nearly died in the first week, offered their artistic knowledge in exchange for water and shelter. They created simple but beautiful decorations for the camp, and more importantly, they knew how to weave materials in ways that provided better insulation and heat protection. A solitary Zephyrian explorer traded detailed maps of the desert region, complete with notes about terrain features and potential resources. The maps revealed that Tom had chosen his digging site perfectly at the intersection of 3 underground water channels. By the third week, the settlement had grown beyond anything the challenge organizers had expected. What was supposed to be a survival trial had become a demonstration of interspecies cooperation. The different aliens worked together on projects that combined their various skills and knowledge. The Corvin soldiers and Drex warriors collaborated on building better shelters. The Veilani scientists and Trillan artists created beautiful but functional shade structures. The Notari used their understanding of fluid dynamics to help improve the well system. Tom found himself managing not just water distribution, but a complex economy based on knowledge, skills, and mutual aid. He had never studied business or economics, but desert survival had taught him the basic principle that everyone had something valuable to offer. The most surprising trade came from an unexpected source. A small, quiet being called Pip, from a species Tom had never heard of, approached him one evening with an offer that seemed too good to be true. "Human Tom," Pip said in a high, squeaky voice through the translator. "My people are engineers. We design systems for harsh environments. I can show you how to expand your well into a permanent water source that will serve hundreds of people." Tom looked at the small alien with curiosity. Pip had been so quiet throughout the challenge that Tom had almost forgotten about him. "What would you want in return?" "Just water and permission to stay. My people are not warriors or explorers or scientists. We are builders. Let me build something here, and I will be content." The engineering knowledge that Pip shared over the next few days transformed Tom's simple well into something approaching a small oasis. The alien showed him how to dig lateral channels that would collect water from a wider area, how to create natural filtration systems using local sand and rock, and how to build storage tanks that would keep water cool even in the desert heat. Working together, they expanded the water production to the point where Tom could offer regular rations to everyone in the camp without worrying about shortages. The settlement had moved beyond mere survival to something approaching comfort. As the final week of the challenge approached, Tom realized that what had started as a desperate search for water had become something much more significant. He had accidentally created a model for how different species could work together, combining their various strengths to overcome challenges that none of them could face alone. The desert had tested them all, but instead of breaking them, it had taught them to build something stronger together. The rescue ships arrived exactly 30 days after the challenge began, descending through Ashara Prime's orange sky like silver birds returning to roost. Their crews expected to find scattered survivors barely clinging to life, maybe a few emergency beacon locations where contestants had given up and called for help. Instead, they found something that would become legendary throughout the galactic community. Tom stood beside his well, watching the ships land near what had once been the original drop point. Around him, the desert settlement bustled with activity, as the various alien contestants prepared for extraction. But they weren't packing the desperate belongings of survivors. They were organizing the possessions of people who had built something together. The first rescue team to reach the settlement consisted of Galactic Council observers and medical personnel expecting to treat heat stroke and dehydration. Instead, they found healthy, well-hydrated beings working together to dismantle structures they had built over the past month. The lead observer, a tall figure in environmental armor, stopped at the edge of the settlement and stared. The translator, in Tom's ear, carried his stunned words clearly. "This is impossible. According to our models, no one should have survived more than 15 days in these conditions." Dr. Wren, who had become something of an unofficial spokesperson for the group, approached the observer with confident steps. Her robes were still desert-stained, but her bearing showed none of the desperation the rescue team expected to find. "Honored observer," she said formally. "We must report that the human Tom Bradley not only survived the challenge, but created the conditions for all of us to thrive. His knowledge of water location and desert survival has been extraordinary." The observers. Helmet turned toward Tom, who was helping Pip dismantle the improved well system they had built together. "The human. But they're supposed to be the primitive species. Their technology level barely qualifies them for council membership." Commander Tor, the Drex warrior who had initially dismissed humans as weaklings, stepped forward. His scarred face carried an expression Tom had never seen before, something that might have been respect. "Honored observer," Tor said in his growling voice. "This human taught us that survival is not about having the most advanced weapons or the strongest armor. It is about understanding the environment and working with it instead of against it." Captain Rex nodded agreement. The humans' methods appeared primitive at first. Hand tools, simple techniques, basic knowledge passed down through generations. But these methods proved more effective than our advanced systems in this environment. The observer looked around the settlement with growing amazement. Solar collectors that the Trillin had woven from local materials. Shelter systems that combined Corvin military engineering with Drex construction techniques. Water storage and filtration systems that blended human intuition with Pip's engineering expertise. "How many contestants requested emergency extraction?" the observer asked. 17, Dr. Wren replied. "Of the original 43 participants, the rest of us chose to remain and learn from the humans' methods." Tom wiped sweat from his forehead and walked over to join the conversation. The rescue team's environmental suits made them look like aliens to him now, after weeks of living alongside beings who had adapted to the desert rather than hiding from it. The challenge was supposed to test individual survival capabilities, the observer said to Tom directly. "But you seem to have created a cooperative community instead." Tom shrugged. "Didn't see the point in watching people die when there was enough water for everyone. Besides, they all had things to teach me, too. I learned more in the past month than I had in years before this." The observer's helmet tilted as he processed this response. In most Galactic Council records, primitive species were expected to be territorial and competitive, hoarding resources and fighting for survival. The idea that a supposedly backward human would freely share life-saving water while building an interspecies community challenged fundamental assumptions about cultural development. Over the next few hours, as the rescue teams interviewed each contestant, a clear picture emerged that none of the observers had expected. The human hadn't just survived the desert. He had mastered it so completely that he was able to share that mastery with others. The Helix representatives, their crystalline bodies slowly healing now that they had adequate water and shade, described how Tom had taught them to work during the cooler hours and rest during peak heat. The Nautari explained how human knowledge of water conservation had allowed them to stretch their biological capabilities far beyond what they thought possible. Pip, the quiet engineer, was most eloquent of all. The human showed us that technology should serve the environment, not fight against it. His well-design worked because it followed the natural patterns of water movement. Our machines failed because they tried to impose artificial patterns on a natural system. As the day wore on and the rescue teams prepared to depart, it became clear that something unprecedented had happened on Ashara Prime. The survival challenge had been designed to rank species by their individual capabilities in extreme environments. Instead, it had demonstrated something far more valuable about cooperation and adaptation. The final surprise came when the lead observer approached Tom with an official communication device. "Human Tom Bradley," the observer said formally. "The Galactic Council requests your presence at the next session. They wish to discuss your methods and their potential applications to other challenges the Council faces." Tom looked at the device, then around at his alien companions who were preparing to return to their homeworlds. What kind of challenges? Colony worlds with harsh environments, resource disputes between species, situations where technological solutions have failed, and we need different approaches. Dr. Wren stepped closer. "You should accept, human Tom. What you have taught us here, it could help many others across the galaxy." Commander Tor nodded gruffly. "The human's knowledge is too valuable to waste on just one desert." Tom thought about his grandfather, who had spent his life finding water in impossible places, but never traveled beyond Earth. He thought about the lessons learned over generations of desert survival, now proven effective on an alien world under alien suns. "I'll consider it," he told the observer, "but I want to bring some of these people with me. They know things about their environments that could help too." The observer agreed immediately, though Tom suspected he didn't fully understand what he was agreeing to yet. As the rescue ships prepared for departure, Tom took one last look at the settlement they had built around his well. The structures would remain here, gradually worn away by wind and sand until the desert reclaimed them. But what they represented would last much longer. The other contestants were boarding their assigned ships, but they weren't leaving as the same beings who had arrived 30 days ago. The Corvan soldiers moved with less rigid discipline, having learned that flexibility could be more valuable than following protocol. The Velani scientists carried notebooks filled with observations about intuitive knowledge that couldn't be measured by instruments. Even the proud Drex warriors had gained respect for methods that didn't involve conquest or domination. Captain Rex approached Tom one final time before boarding. "Human," he said, offering a formal military salute, "my people will remember what you taught us about adaptation and cooperation. When we face challenges that our technology cannot solve, we will remember the lesson of the well." Dr. Wren was more emotional in her farewell. "You have given us all a new way of seeing survival," she told Tom, "not as a battle against the environment, but as a conversation with it. This knowledge will change how my people approach unknown worlds." Pip, the quiet engineer, had perhaps been changed the most by the experience. The small alien had discovered that his people's building skills became even more powerful when combined with natural observation and traditional knowledge. "Human Tom," Pip said in his squeaky voice, "I will tell my people about the well you dug by hand. They will not believe me at first, but I will show them the designs we created together. Sometimes the best engineering follows the oldest wisdom." As Tom boarded his own transport ship, he carried with him more than just the satisfaction of survival. He had gained knowledge from a dozen different species, insights into how different civilizations approached problems, and most importantly, proof that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or weapons, but the ability to adapt and work with others. The ship lifted off from Ashara Prime, leaving behind the red desert that had tested them all. Through the porthole, Tom could see his well growing smaller until it disappeared entirely, just another dot in the vast wasteland. But its impact would ripple across the galaxy in ways none of them could yet imagine. During the journey back to the Council worlds, Tom learned more about what his success meant to the broader galactic community. The survival challenge had been broadcast throughout Council space, with billions of beings watching to see how different species would handle extreme conditions. The early days had gone as expected, with various species demonstrating their technological capabilities before succumbing to the harsh environment. But Tom's discovery of water, and more importantly, his decision to share it freely with competitors, had captured the imagination of viewers across the galaxy. The observer who had interviewed him, Commander Val, explained the significance during their journey. Most species, when they achieve technological advancement, tend to become dependent on their systems. They lose touch with the basic survival skills their ancestors developed. Your people seem to have maintained that connection. Tom thought about Earth, with its diverse climates and frequent natural disasters that kept humanity from becoming too comfortable. Maybe we just haven't had time to get soft yet. Earth keeps throwing new challenges at us. That may be your greatest advantage, Commander Val replied. The Council faces problems that advanced technology cannot solve. Colonial disputes over resource rights, environmental challenges on frontier worlds, situations where different species need to work together but don't understand each other's capabilities. The conversation helped Tom understand why the Council wanted to hire him as a survival consultant. It wasn't just about finding water in deserts. It was about helping different species learn to work together when their usual methods failed. 3 months later, Tom found himself on his first official Council assignment mediating a dispute between two species over mining rights on a contested world. The Herak wanted to use massive extraction machines that would strip away the surface layers efficiently. The gentle Bloom preferred slower, more careful methods that wouldn't damage the delicate ecosystem they wanted to preserve. Using lessons learned in the desert, Tom helped both species understand that they could achieve their goals better by combining their approaches. The Herak's efficiency, paired with the Bloom's environmental knowledge, created a mining operation that was both productive and sustainable. But the real breakthrough came when Tom suggested that representatives from both species spend time working together in the field, sharing knowledge and learning each other's methods directly. Just as the desert settlement had brought different aliens together around a common need for water, the mining project created cooperation around a shared interest in success. The project became a model for council intervention in similar disputes. Instead of imposing technological solutions or political compromises, Tom's approach focused on helping species discover what they could accomplish together. Word of his success spread throughout council space, and soon Tom was receiving requests from colonies facing environmental challenges, trading disputes that had stalled negotiations, and exploration missions that needed someone who understood both survival and cooperation. Dr. Wren, who had accepted a position studying traditional knowledge systems, often worked with him on these assignments. "You have started something important, human Tom," she told him during one of their missions. "The Council is learning that advancement isn't just about developing better technology, it's also about remembering and applying the wisdom that brought us this far." The desert trial had ended with Tom's survival, but its real lesson was just beginning to influence the galaxy. Humanity's reputation slowly shifted from primitive newcomers to practical survivors who understand cooperation. Other species began seeking out human expertise not for advanced weapons or faster ships, but for the harder-to-quantify skills of adaptation, resourcefulness, and the ability to find common ground with strangers. Years later, when Tom finally returned to Earth for a visit, his grandfather was still alive and eager to hear stories about his adventures. The old man listened carefully to tales of alien deserts and interspecies cooperation, nodding at familiar themes even in unfamiliar contexts. "Sounds like you remembered what I taught you about reading the signs," his grandfather said with satisfaction. "Water's the same everywhere, even if the worlds are different. And people are people, whether they're from the next valley over or the next galaxy." Tom smiled, thinking about all the aliens who had become friends and colleagues over the years since the challenge. "Yeah, Grandpa, the well you taught me to dig turned out to be bigger than either of us imagined." The lesson of the desert well had become legend throughout the galaxy. Sometimes the most advanced solution is also the most ancient one, and sometimes the best technology for survival is simply knowing how to work together.